it's so expensive to run hospitals. Like if you think of all of the things that has to go into play for them to operate, and a lot of times people come in that can't afford it, right? A lot of people are hurt.
A lot of people cannot afford it.
Yeah, and it's expensive to be a doctor. It's expensive to be to become a doctor. But then all this equipment, and you have the health insurance industry, and they charge the hospital this much, but they could actually charge it this much, but they have to inflate the premium so they can, how it's a circus. Truthfully, like if you get into the medical and the
insurance,
circus. It's a circus, and that falls into the hospital. And we have one because if we didn't have the state funding for it, we might not have really any, right? Which we need. We need it. We have people coming here from all over the world. They get hurt up in Zion on Bear Claw Trail, or they're riding their bikes, they're four-wheeling, they're doing extreme sports all over the county, whether we like it or not, and we need a place that can help them when they get hurt.
Besides that, we have an aging population.
On top of it, yeah.
On top of it, that needs that extra care. All those specialists that help. I know 10 years ago, my son was diagnosed as a type 1 diabetic. And
my son was, when he was 4, he's 7 now. Yeah, so 3 years ago.
And I don't even see, and you probably have to go to Northern Utah to get help, to have a pediatrician, endocrinologist look at him. You're still having to make a drive probably once a year. They do video. They're doing video calls, but I haven't. This isn't to say anything about them in particular. It's just at a certain point, I think, and you know this, at a certain point you've learned as much as you can learn about it, and now you're having to kind of go outside of the system a little bit to say, hey, what works for my child versus what works for other kids? Is that your experience or no? Well, my son was actually diagnosed in Paraguay and was in a coma and came back. Oh my gosh. He was 19, but he came back 55 pounds lighter and with some other health issues because, Paraguay is a different world. And so Dr. Moreno really, she was new to the area at that point, but he just filled up with fluid because he was having some organ shutdown. Yeah. So anyway, but over the last 10 years, there's things that change. And I think you may see it in your child as they grow, they develop, the hormone levels change, they have growth spurts, they have all these things they experience. And to have somebody here locally who can say, put eyes on them and telemed maybe do the same thing, but actually put eyes on them and say, I care about you. This is the deal. We got to do this. See this screen. This is what's going on. Did you eat cereal or pasta that day? This is what you do with your pump. And I think if we had to drive to Salt Lake, it would be a different experience. And sometimes you need somebody that day. You don't need somebody in a month. And my mother-in-law was diagnosed with cancer probably 30 years ago. And she was diagnosed with 5 different kinds of cancer. Oh, and goodness. So as we have the cancer, people down here are so exceptional. I think if we had to drive to Salt Lake for every one of those procedures, especially she passed away this last year, but she kept having to have ports and stuff put in her every 3 or 4 days to keep her comfortable. If that drive was to Salt Lake, the expense for the individual, and she would have passed away much sooner because she wouldn't have got the care. Yeah. So when we look at that, like what a benefit that hospital is, no matter who owns it, to the community, how much we value that. Agreed. And really, it is part of our economy. A lot of people work at the hospital. Well, so I think what the segue for me in this conversation, first of all, I'm sorry about your mom. It's my mom-in-law, but she was awesome. Yeah. That's tough. Everybody's impacted by cancer or something like that. And, diabetes, it's scary. So my son was 4 when he was diagnosed and we caught it. My wife, oh my gosh. Truthfully, I think God gave her the tingly spider sense, right? Like there's a problem. The mom. Yeah, it's for sure. If it was just me, there's not a chance I would have diagnosed him correctly and potentially could have lost him, right? Because just a few months before. How did she know? So he was wet in the bed quite a bit and drinking a lot of water. And so we're like, buddy, just let's hold off on water before dinner now, right? Mm-hmm. And one night, right before bed, we had him go to the bathroom and wash his hands, and he was drinking out of the faucet. Not that the water's not good enough to drink out of the faucet, but like we don't drink water out of the faucet. And
I'm like, what's wrong, buddy? He's like, I'm just so thirsty. And he was just dying over it. And my wife immediately, she's like, I think that's a symptom of type 1. And I was like, really? And she's like, yeah, she didn't sleep all night. I was leaving to Lake Tahoe the next day. I said, let's call Dr. Merkley, our pediatrician. She called him the next morning, immediately got him in. They took him immediately to the ER. His glucose level was high 500s, which normal is 100 or between less. 80 to 100. Yeah. And he was at 500, and he probably had been at 500 for a week at that point, depending on when, how long his pancreas had started to shut down. So a little girl, 4 years old, she had passed away just months before because
little Miss Kicey, my neighbor.
It's heartbreaking because I think as parents.
Was that 10? How long ago was that? How long was your son diagnosed?
So he's 7 now, so 3 years ago.
Oh, then it wasn't Kicey, but yeah.
So, and even Kicey, because I think I've heard a couple of times when I tell the story, at 4 years old, somebody had just passed away, because the hospital had told us somebody had passed away. That story is just so, it's true. And it happens all the time for type 1 diabetics. And it's been tough. We've had a good system. IHC's done a good job for us, especially on the training and understanding, because he can't do it himself, right? And I'm sure your son at 19, especially going into a coma, the organ shut down, like that whole thing, I can't imagine, right? Being 19 and figuring it out. But as a parent now, he doesn't have the capability to take care of himself, right? He's terrified. He doesn't even like poking his own finger still, right? And we don't have a pump yet because he's so little and there's not a lot of fat on him. No so fat. Like the glucometer, the constant glucose monitor doesn't really work.
The Dexcom doesn't work.
It works enough, better than the finger pokes every single day, but also the pump is relying on the Dexcom to work together, right? Talk to each other. And then he's hormone levels and growing, and his excitement levels, you can tell when he gets anxious, his glucose starts to go up, right? Like there's so many factors that go into it. It's not just sugar and carbs.
It's amazing what bodies do. I remember my son.
How complex they are.
He realized that he had his blood sugar would spike sitting in a class deciding whether or not to answer the question. I mean, because you
could feel it coming up.
Well, you release some glucose when you
need the energy and the firing stimulation in your brain.
He's like, I haven't ate. He goes, and all of a sudden I'm at 150, and it's like I haven't even eaten anything for 2 hours. Like, how does that happen? But pretty soon you realize. I mean, you get to know your body.
Yeah,
they get to know their body. I guess, not me.
Yeah. Well, and for my wife, because she lives every day, thinking about it every day at every moment.
And in the middle of the night,
it's on her Apple Watch, which is awesome.
In the middle of the night.
In the middle of the night. Now, in the middle of the night, that's like her time. She gets to shut down, and I end up helping out in the middle of the night. So I get up like 2:00 every morning, just to check where he's at. Sometimes two or three times. Last night I was up 3 times.
Yes,
because he went low, and so had to wake him up and give him sugar and
see where that went.
And then he went up and then came right back down. So immediately after, it was like 3:45. I'm back up again, trying to get him through the rest of the night, because there's not like a simple, hey, just give him this and then all of a sudden he'll make it through the night. Because I also don't want him to shoot through the roof, give him a bunch of carbs or a bunch of sugar, and then he goes up to 400, because then now his body's trying to get rid of it, and he wets the bed and all kinds of stuff, right? So it's
so
this
does he have
roller
Dawn
coaster
phenomenon? Does he have that?
I don't know what that is.
That my son, when he stands up, like he wakes up and gets out of bed, his blood sugar will raise.
Oh yeah,
on its own.
That, yeah.
Like he doesn't have to eat. So that was one thing we had to work on. He had to work on, not me. But like wake up. Sometimes you go downstairs to have that little bit of chocolate milk or your cracker or whatever you're gonna have. Mm-hmm. But his blood sugar would just elevate because he woke up, because you reach a little glucose in the morning when you wake up, then that just on its own. So then he would be a little bit high because he drank a little bit of chocolate milk or the cracker. Besides, he woke up. So then,
yeah. So it's really like knowing all these little intricacies,
nuances.
But so going back to kind of health, public and health and safety. We had this tax conversation around needing police workers, and then I went to the Salt Lake Tribune, had like a community meeting at Utah Tech about housing affordability specifically, and what the challenges are here locally, and make sure that, knowing the Salt Lake Tribune, typically it's a very narrow window of people that are going and speaking and talking to, which I wasn't quoted in the the article. However, I was outspoken as I tend to be. However, I wanted to go and make sure that I was like, hey, I'm going to represent the facts that I know to be true for sure, and at least make sure that the people reporting on it get something outside of their narrow window. But it was brought up to me that our nurses at the local hospital, we can't hire nurses at our own hospital, even though we're cranking out, 300, 400 plus nurses every semester out of the Utah Tech, and we can't even hire those to come work for us at the hospital because the affordability to be able to live here and be entry-level nurse position, they don't match, right? They don't have a place to stay, so they end up going somewhere else because they can't stay here. Do you see that as the same, or do you see that perspective?
I do see that perspective. I do see that perspective. At the same time, I don't know how local government resolves that issue. Mm-hmm. I've often questioned with these larger organizations if it was a problem, because if you've been to the HAC meetings, I've been to the HAC meetings, that sometimes I think if you're a big corporation, why don't you create some housing with some deed restrictions yourself? That if that is part of working for me, that we have this housing, it may not be everything you dreamed of in a house, but it's a place to start. Mm-hmm. Then when you sell that house, you take so much of that equity with you when you go. But that is actually part of your benefit package. That if housing. That if you have this, that it's almost subsidized renting or whatever, mm-hmm. but you own the house, and then when you deed restrict it, you can only go up 3% a year. And so it stays in that pot of housing. What's
interesting is that at that point, a local restaurant owner is doing that specifically for his own employees at the restaurant level. And it's not like he's not a multi-million-dollar organization like IHC or billion-dollar organization like IHC. He's just a local entrepreneur. It's like, hey, I see a need and this can be a benefit package to me. Why don't you think IHC is doing that?
I'm not in charge of IHC. I can tell you from the city perspective, because I've asked this question, like, you could build a house with a carport, you can build apartment buildings, you can build all these other things. Some of the issue is, and you sell real estate and I sell real estate, is it not nice enough anymore? My first house had Formica and vinyl flooring and had asphalt shingle roof and had a carport on a 0.18 lot. And a lot of times people want to live in something nicer.
With granite countertops.
Mm-hmm. Or quartz or whatever, those kind of things. But it's like, this is not your ending spot. This is your beginning spot, or where you're on life's journey until you get to the next spot. But I've wondered, how come those larger organizations who are part of the conversation, those meetings, do not step up unless they just don't want to be involved with it? Because I do think nurses are not the only ones. You look at school teachers, look at our firemen, our policemen.
It's all blue collar workers that we have a difficulty. We've always been, I think, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, a have and have not town for the last probably 10 years, 15 years. We've started to carve out the natives and the working class, right? Probably the last 10 years since the market crashed and all those people lost all their homes, all those foreclosures, and all the framers and construction workers had to go to North Dakota and go work in the oil fields, and then never came back. They never came back. So we hollowed out, the working class that was here.